The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Jair Messias Bolsonaro, President of the Federal Republic of Brazil. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. The General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Jair Messias Bolsonaro, President of the Federal Republic of Brazil, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Hello, testing the English channel. This is the English channel. Mr. Shaba Karosi, President of the 77th General Assembly of the United Nations. Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state, heads of government, and heads of delegation. Ladies and gentlemen at large, I begin by congratulating you, Ambassador Shaba Karosi, on your election as President of this General Assembly. You can be sure that you can certainly count on Brazil's support. The theme chosen for this general debate revolves around a concept that perfectly applies to the moment we currently live, a watershed moment. Mr. President, our collective responsibility at this General Assembly consists in understanding the actual scope of the challenges that make up this watershed moment, and from there build the responses that draw their strength from the goals that we all share. The task at hand is not a simple one, but strictly speaking, we have no alternative. The effort must begin within each of our countries, domestically. First of all, it is what we do at the domestic level that gives the measure of the authority with which we act at the international level. Therefore, allow me to speak from my country's perspective. When Brazil voices her views on the public health agenda, we do so with the legitimate authority of a government that during the COVID-19 pandemic spared no efforts to save lives and preserve jobs. Like so many other countries, we focused our attention from the very outset on ensuring emergency financial aid to those most in need. Our goal was to protect families' income so that they could face up to the economic hardships resulting from the pandemic. Therefore, we managed to benefit more than 68 million people, the equivalent to 1/3 of the Brazilian population. In parallel, we launched a broad-ranging vaccination program, including domestic production of vaccines. We are a nation of more than 210 million people, and already we have more than 80% of our population fully vaccinated against COVID-19. All were vaccinated voluntarily, in due respect of one's individual freedom. Likewise, in the economic arena, Brazil has the legitimate authority of a country that, for the sake of sustainable and inclusive growth, has been putting in place reforms to attract investments and improve the standards of living of her population. Under my administration, we uprooted the systemic corruption that existed in the country. Between 2003 and 2015 alone, a period in which the left wing presided over in Brazil, indebtedness levels at the oil state company Petrobras due to mismanagement and politically driven appointments and favors, as well as the diversion of funds, reached up to $170 billion. The person responsible for that was convicted, unanimously convicted in 3 different court instances. Whistleblowers have returned $1 billion, and we paid to the U.S. stock market another $1 billion due to losses incurred by shareholders. But that is the Brazil of the past. We have enhanced public services by reducing costs and investing in science and technology. Today, for example, Brazil is the world's 7th most digitally advanced country. Altogether, 135 million people access 4,900 services provided by my administration. Brazil has been a pioneer in 5G deployment in Latin America. We have also carried out a comprehensive agenda of privatization and concession projects with an emphasis on infrastructure. We have also completed the São Francisco River Transposition Project, therefore bringing water to the Brazilian northeastern region. We have also adopted new regulatory frameworks, such as in basic sanitation, railways, and natural gas. Moreover, we have improved the business environment with the Economic Freedom Law and the Startup Law. As a result, we now have created opportunities for young people to be entrepreneurs and have quality jobs. Crowning all of this effort to modernize the Brazilian economy, we have made great strides towards Brazil's accession as a full member of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. Despite the global crisis, Brazil is getting to the end of 2022 with an economy at full recovery. We have high employment rates and a low inflation rate. The economy is back on the path of growth. Poverty has increased across the world under the impact of the pandemic. In Brazil, it began to fall sharply. The figures speak for themselves. It is estimated that by the end of 2022, 4% of Brazilian families will be living below the extreme poverty level. In 2019, it was 5.1%. This reflects a drop of more than 20%. The Brazil Aid Program, a minimum income country designed and established by my administration during the pandemic, currently meets the needs of 20 million families and pays out $4 a day to the poorest families in the country. Employment fell by 5 percentage points, reaching 9.1%, a rate not seen in 7 years. We have lowered inflation with an estimate of less than 7% for 2022. I am pleased to announce that we have had unprecedented deflation in Brazil in the months of July and August this year. Since June, the price of gasoline has dropped by more than 30%. Today, 1 liter of gasoline in Brazil costs about 0.90 cents of $1. The price of electricity has also dropped by more than 15%. Let me emphasize that the cost of energy has not dropped because of price fixing or any other type of state intervention. Rather, it was the result of a tax rationalization policy designed and implemented with support by the National Congress. In 2021, Brazil was the 4th largest destination country for foreign direct investment in the world. Our foreign trade reached the historic milestone of 39% of the GDP, even after reducing taxes or lowering taxes down to zero on thousands of products. Domestically, we also have record breakers in 3 areas: tax collection, state-owned company profit levels, and the public debt to GDP ratio. In fact, in 2021, we had a surplus in the consolidated results or figures for national accounts. Brazilian GDP increased by 1.2% in the second quarter, and the forecast is for up to 3% in 2022. We enjoy the peace of mind of those who are working in the right path, the path to shared prosperity among Brazilians, and beyond that, prosperity shared with our neighbors and other partners worldwide. This is precisely what we see, for example, in food production. 4 decades ago, Brazil used to be a food importer. Today, we are one of the world's largest food exporters. And this has only been possible thanks to heavy investments in science and innovation with a view to boosting productivity, yield levels, and sustainability. May I here pay a tribute to Mr. Alisson Polinelli, the Brazilian candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize, for his role in expanding the Brazilian agricultural frontier with the use of new technologies. This year, Brazil has already started the harvest, or the largest grain harvest in our history. We estimate it to be at least 270 million tons. In a few years, Brazil will also make the transition from net importer of wheat to a net exporter of wheat. For the 2022-2023 period, the forecast is that our total production will exceed 300 million tons. As stated by Director General of the World Trade Organization in a recent visit to Brazil, she stated that if it were not for Brazilian agribusiness, the planet would go hungry, since we feed more than 1 billion people worldwide. Our agribusiness is a source of national pride. Mr. President, I also wish to call to mind here that also in the field of sustainable development, Brazil's track record of achievements is a source of credibility for our country's international action. As regards the environment and sustainable development, Brazil is part of the solution and stands as a reference to the world. Two-thirds of all of the Brazilian territory remain untouched, covered by native vegetation, precisely as it were when Brazil was first discovered in the 1500s. In the Brazilian Amazon region, an area as big as Western Europe, more than 80% of the rainforest remains untouched and pristine, contrary to what is often reported by the mainstream national and international media. It is absolutely key and essential that when taking care of the environment, we do not overlook people. The Amazon region is home to more than 20 million people, including indigenous people and riverside dwellers, whose livelihood depends on some form of economic use of the forest. We have brought internet connectivity to more than 100,000 rural schools and more than 500 indigenous communities. Brazil began its energy transition almost half a century ago in response to the oil crises of that time. Today, we have a modern and sustainable biofuel industry, an industry that currently positively contributes to the cleanest energy mix among G20 countries. About 84% of our electricity or energy mix is currently renewable, and this is a goal that many developed countries hope to achieve only after 2040 or 2050. Last year, Brazil was chosen or declared by the United Nations as a global transition for energy transition. We have the potential to become a major global exporter of clean energy. We have a surplus already being built up which can reach more than 100 gigawatts between biomass, onshore wind projects and solar projects, in addition to the untapped opportunity of 700 gigawatt offshore wind farms with one of the lowest production costs in the world. These sources will produce green hydrogen for export. Part of this 100% clean energy opens the possibility for us to become suppliers of highly competitive industrial projects, especially in the Brazilian Northeast, with one of the smallest carbon footprints in the world. The Sustainable Development Agenda is impacted in many ways by threats to international peace and security. We all built the United Nations from the ruins of the Second World War in the last century. What motivated us back then was the determination to avoid a repetition of the cycle of destruction that marked the first half of the 20th century. To a certain extent, in hindsight, we can say that we were successful. But today, the conflict in Ukraine serves as a warning. A reform of the UN system is essential for us to find world peace. In the specific case of the Security Council, after 25 years of debate, it is clear that we must look for innovative solutions. Brazil addresses this topic based on an experience that goes way back and dates back to the very beginnings of the United Nations. It is now the 11th time that we hold a non-permanent seat at the UN Security Council. We have sought to offer our very best to achieve peaceful and negotiated solutions to international conflicts, always guided by the UN Charter and international law. Brazil also has an extensive history of participation in UN peacekeeping operations. From Suez to Angola, from Haiti to Lebanon, we have always supported peacekeeping. We have also contributed to peace by opening up our borders to those seeking a chance to restart their lives in our country. Since 2018, over 6 million Venezuelan brothers have been forced to leave their country. Many of them came to Brazil. Our response to this challenge was Operation Welcome, which has become an international benchmark reference. More than 350,000 Venezuelan nationals have found in Brazilian territory emergency assistance, protection, documentation, and the possibility of a fresh start. All of them have had access to the labor market, to public services, and to social benefits. In recent months, around 600 Venezuelans have arrived in Brazil every day on foot, the vast majority of which are women and children, weighing on average 15 kilos less than before, and running away from violence and hunger. The Brazilian humanitarian reception policy goes beyond Venezuela. We have also welcomed Haitians, Syrians, Afghans, and Ukrainians. Mr. President, the conflict in Ukraine has been going on for 7 months already, and it is a source of great concern, not only in Europe, but throughout the world. First of all, I would like to reiterate Brazil's gratitude to the countries that helped with the evacuation of Brazilian nationals who were in Ukraine when the conflict first started, especially Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and the Czech Republic. Thank you very much. The evacuation operation was successful. We left no one behind, not even their pets. Regarding the conflict in itself, Brazil has been guided by the principles of international law and the UN Charter, principles that are also enshrined in our national constitution. We advocate an immediate ceasefire, the protection of civilians and non-combatants, the preservation of critical infrastructure to assist the population, and the maintenance of all channels of dialogue between the parties at conflict. These are the first steps towards achieving a solution that will be long-lasting and sustainable. And we have been working in that direction. At the United Nations and also elsewhere, we have tried to avoid hampering the channels of dialogue as a result of polarization around the conflict. Accordingly, we are against diplomatic and economic isolation. The effects of the conflict can already be felt in the world prices of foodstuffs, fuel, and other raw materials. All of this impact drives us all away from the sustainable development goals. Countries that once presented themselves as leaders of the low-carbon economy have now turned to dirty sources of energy. This is a serious setback for the environment. We support all efforts to reduce the economic impacts of this crisis. But we do not believe that the best way is to adopt one-sided or unilateral and selective sanctions that are inconsistent with international law. These measures have harmed economic recovery and have threatened the human rights of vulnerable populations, including in European countries. The solution to the conflict in Ukraine will only be achieved through negotiation and dialogue. I make an plea to the parties as well as to the entire international community. Let us not miss any opportunity to end the conflict and ensure peace. The stability, security, and prosperity of humankind are at serious risk if the conflict continues. Mr. President, I have been an unconditional supporter of freedom of speech. Moreover, under my administration, Brazil has made an effort to bring the right to freedom of religion to the very core of the international human rights agenda. It is essential to ensure that everyone has the right to freely worship and practice their religious orientation without any discrimination whatsoever. I would like to inform here that Brazil stands ready to welcome the Catholic priests and nuns who have suffered persecution by the dictatorial regime in Nicaragua. Brazil repudiates religious persecution wherever it may occur in the world. Other fundamental values for Brazilian society with implications to the human rights agenda include the defense of family values, the right to life since conception, the right to self-defense, and the repudiation of gender ideology. I would also like to underscore the priority we have attached to women's rights and protection. Our efforts to sanction over 70 legal norms on the subject since the very beginning of my administration in 2019 is thorough evidence of this commitment. We fight violence against women very strictly. It is part and parcel of our broader priority to ensure public security and safety for all Brazilians. The results are visible in our government figures. A 7.7% drop in the number of murders of women and a decrease in the general number of deaths by murder. In 2017, there were 30 deaths per 100,000 inhabitants. Now there are only 17. Violence in rural areas has also plummeted at the same time as land tenure by the most in need has increased. Under my administration, we have delivered 400,000 rural property land title deeds, 80% of which given to women. In Brazil, we work to ensure that we have strong, independent women so that they can get wherever they wish. First Lady Michelle Bolsonaro has given a new meaning to volunteer work since 2019, with special attention to people with disabilities and rare diseases. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Heads of State and Government, ladies and gentlemen, last September 7th, Brazil celebrated 200 years of history as an independent nation. Millions of Brazilians took to the streets, called upon by their government and wearing the colors of their flag, our flag. It was the largest civic demonstration in the history of our country, a people that believes in God, the homeland, family, and freedom. Thank you all very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federal Republic of Brazil for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency.